Hello there lads and ladies, and welcome back to another episode of Girls and Panzer. Today we are going to be ranking all the tanks from small, medium to large. I hope you're all enjoying, lads and ladies. This is going to be an interesting one. We're going to start out with the 3 Panzer IVs from Urarai's side basically. So, first we have the Panzer IV MKD. A very decent tank, very good maneuverability. I find myself finding it really easy to get in and out of the tanks to be able to shoot them up. As you can see, I'm basically in the extra match mode against the mouse. Simply, these are the easiest tanks to deal with when you've got high mobility, very good mobility with this one. The shortened cannon does make it a little harder to get damaging shots, so really you want to use little things like the extra shells, basically the extra attacking power. Those always help basically. I always look for mobility. This one has decent mobility, so for a ranking for this tank I'd have to give it from, I'd say, very fun to downright good. Next we have the Panzer IV Type F2. With this one it's a more elongated cannon, so we've got more damage, and oddly enough it feels a bit clunkier than the last one. I don't know why that is, but for some reason it feels much better when I'm drifting. The drifting is where most of the power comes from and where an awful lot of the attack power will come from. So with the last one I gave it a very fun rating. This one, it's not as fun, but it's decent. Those will be my rankings from slow and clunky to decent to basically fun. Those will be my rankings basically. With this one I will give it a decent score because this is not as mobile as the other Panzer IV variant, but it's still a decent tank nonetheless basically. The interesting thing with this tank at least is that I find myself easier to drift. You can literally just start and then go straight into the drift itself basically. It does feel quite good to control. You honestly do feel pretty decent when you go through all those drifts with it. Next we have the Panzer IV Type H. This one has longer skirts on the side, so it's got more armor, but it does not feel as fast as the previous 2 Panzer IVs. But again, you can still drift with it. You've got decent damage and you've got a very nice design to it. I actually love how it looks with the skirts on the side basically. The skirts give it obviously more protection obviously, but although there's a lack of mobility, because I've spent most of the game playing with this tank, you feel a comfortability with it compared to say other tanks basically. The mouses are rather slow to be able to intercept you, so it's quite easy to weave in and out of them to be able to shoot them from the rear and the sides. This tank is very fun, I'm not gonna lie. I actually enjoy using the Panzer IV. I enjoy using most of the German tanks. Some of the clunkier ones I'm not really too fond of, but this one definitely does not feel clunky. You feel like you can drift in and out of them no problem. And for this one, for a rating, I will give it a decent score. Not clunky, but not bad. Now we move on to the Assault 3 Stug type. This one was very hard to get to grips with. As you can see by my health, I had to use one of my specials to be able to try and get my health back. It's a quick, nifty little tank, which is fine, but drifting to be able to get a shot on these mouses was very difficult. I had to keep switching targets to be able to land my shots on them, but honestly, the mobility doesn't take away from the fact that this tank really needs you to line up properly. And this is going to be a problem with the later tanks. When you're too slow to be able to drift, that is when the clunkiness comes into it basically. The thing that saves the Assault 3 is obviously its speed. The speed is the thing that saves it, because without that, I don't think I would have been able to beat these mouses, really. It's fine to line up your shots with them, and you don't have to keep relying on like the auto-aim targeting system. It helps you to actually learn to just fire like right underneath the tank, like what I do here to get underneath it. So for this tank, I'll give it a decent score. Now the Type 89, a medium tank, very hard to handle, especially when it goes over. As you can see, I've fucked up my tracks there, but it's got a decent repair speed and it's got good reloading times for it. The drifting is fun. I feel like I'm not as fast as I was in the Panzer IV, like the MKD type, but this is still a decent tank. Now the 38T is one of the funnest tanks I've had. This is a godsend, one of the fastest tanks. You can literally accelerate from 0.5 to about 15 miles per hour in literally a flick of the analog stick, and I'm constantly drifting without having to move too much. And here, as you can see, my tracks are taken out, but it doesn't matter because my repair speed is very, very quick. Now I move on and I keep on shooting. Yes, you do have to take a couple of more hot swings at the other tanks to be able to do any type of damage, but this is mostly just due to my inexperience, not shooting for the backs more often, not really drifting that often. But honestly, it doesn't matter when you have speed like this tank on your side. This is a fast, mobile tank. This is one of the dark horses of tanks. This is really up there amongst my top 5 favourite tanks, and I only play with this tank maybe twice. It's such a shame that I didn't get to play with it more often, because this is easily better than the Hetzer type that we'll see later on. So for this, I'm giving this a fun rating. I love this tank so much. Now we move on to the Hetzer. It's not as good as the Stug. It's faster than the Stug, and the drifting is better, but for some reason I love the Stug more than the Hetzer. I love the design of the Hetzer, but I just do not like the Hetzer over the Stug. There's just something about it. I feel like I had to take it slow with the Hetzer to be able to line up my shots, and I don't know, it feels clunky. There's just something in it, and the repair here is taking forever. It's lucky that I didn't get taken out here at one specific point, because this just does not feel good. I even took 2 shots there, which thankfully the armor held up. That is its saving grace, is that the armor on the Hetzer kind of saved me basically. But honestly, it's a beautifully designed tank. It looks like a miniature T-28 basically, with that front cannon basically. It's a beautifully designed tank. I like it. I kind of like its turtle look, hence why they kind of gave like the nickname of this tank, the turtle, basically, when they put a little turtle insignia on it, you know, for the girls from the Aurora Academy. But apart from that, it's a decent tank. Not too clunky, but it's fun. Now the M3 Lee, not my favourite American tank. As you can see, I've got 2 cannons which I can shoot, but when you're not experienced with using those cannons, you can definitely fuck up, missing sometimes, shooting the wrong targets. I feel like you're taking the opportunity to shoot, and here, right here, I wasn't so certain how to line up properly, and then I get taken out quite quickly. Not clunky, it's not fun for me personally, but honestly, it's a decent tank. As long as you can get your shots lined up, then it's a decent tank, either way. Now we move on to the Char B1. Not my favourite French tank, but it is tanky. This is one of the tankiest motherfucking tanks I've ever had to come across, basically. Going against it and using it, I felt like I could take 5 or 10 hits and this thing would easily keep me alive for a good while. And here I'm actually getting more to grips with using the double turret system. Very fun to use when you get used to it. And it feels better because I'm not speeding about all over the place missing my shots. I feel like you need to go slower and take your time with your turrets to be able to do anything with this tank basically. Which is fine really, because the Char out of the M3 Lee is probably a better tank because you're forced to go a little bit slower. The M3 Lee is mostly used for mobility, whereas the Char B1 is meant for more defensive attacks, and I feel like you need to have more tanks alongside, but you can still drift with it. It's a decent tank. Now the Porsche Tiger. This is a very slow mess, but it is a heavy tank, and thankfully because of the crew that are inside of it, they were able to give it a kind of a more mobility feel to it. The cannon is its saving grace, that is for sure, because if you get fucking tracks knocked out on this, it takes forever to repair it, and you better hope you're aiming for weak spots when you are like down and out of your luck with the repair times basically. The cannon is the only saving grace for this tank, but to be fair, you can still drift with it. It doesn't feel that clunky. It feels heavy, which is something I like with my heavy tanks, is when you drive them, they have to feel heavy and imposing, and this Porsche Tiger is imposing. With that cannon, it feels perfectly balanced to the point where, yes, the rest of it is just downright rubbish, but the cannon saves it, basically, because it is so powerful. I'll give it a decent score for this one. Now we move on to the Type 3. One of the fastest heavy tanks. It's not as fast as the P40, but it is still decent. I can drift with this. It feels like a heavy tank. It doesn't feel like it when you're driving it though, when you're drifting. As I'm drifting, I'm able to fire off shots real quickly, reload, reset, and then fire again. Very hard to do that in most heavy tanks, but with this one, it feels very good. The cannon is decent, the drifting is decent, the repair times are fun, and I feel like I can get multiple shots off in rapid succession. Like, what was that? 4 seconds, I managed to get off 3 shots, so that is a fun tank. The Churchill. Probably one of my favourite British tanks. Very heavy, very imposing, you cannot drift with it, you have to rely on using other opponents as cover, basically. So as you can see, there are 2 mouses here in front of me. I'm trying to keep my distance, but also keeping the other tanks in front of me, including the one that I've already taken out. So I'm having to use my defensive measures already against the mouse. I'm having to go around this one to blow it up because it's already dead. And now I will try to move around to the other side to take out this grey-silver mouse. That done successfully. I stay behind it shortly before I move on up to take on the other ones. It may feel slow and very clunky, but it does not feel like it is a hindrance to me. I feel like I can easily 360 on its spinning axle quite easily compared to other tanks where you need to reverse all the time. This is why this Churchill looks like it can literally take on most mouse, because it is so maneuverable when you're able to spin on the spot with it, basically. A very well fun little tank. Well, little, it's massive. So this will probably be the second heavy tank that I will say is fun to use, despite not being able to drift. Yes, I will say that you should be able to drift, but yeah, it's a fun tank. I love this tank. Now we move on to the Matilda. The Matilda is not as fun as the Crusader, but it is still decent. I will say that this is a decent tank because it's short enough to get under certain nooks and crannies of tanks to be able to hit them in their weak spots. The decency on the drift is okay. It's not overextended like, say, Rose Hip's Crusader, which I will talk about later. But the Matilda is quite weak, especially at the back if you shoot the fuel tank. So that's kind of an easy spot, and the tracks are a little bit easier to shoot because of how wide they are at the bottom. But it's a decent tank. It is fun to use when you really get going, but it's not one of my favourite English tanks, unfortunately. It's one of those where you need to have a feeling for it. So for this tank, I will just give it a decent score. Not clunky, but not overly fun as well. A very decent tank, basically. It's got decent mobility as well. I just wish it was a little bit quicker to compensate the low firepower that it has, basically, compared to, like, say, you know, the Churchill or something. We move on to the Crusader. We'll be doing both of these, one driven by Darjeeling, the other one driven by, excuse the accident there, one driven by Rosehip. This one has got more of a decent speed. I'm able to drift quite nicely with it. I'm able to move in and out of the mouses quite quickly, although I'm actually using them as stoppers, so I'm not basically bombarded by other mouse at the moment. As you can see, I'm trying to hide behind this mouse to protect myself from the others, because this armor set on this Crusader is weak. I feel like I can get hit twice and I would get shot. Even with Rosehip's one, I get hit once and then I'm taken out, basically. This has got some very weak armor, and the tracks are very exposed, so you can easily hit the tracks and take this thing out. This is a weakness of the Crusader. Once the tracks are taken out, you are just dead in the water, basically. You need to be quick on your button mashing skills, or otherwise this tank is going to get destroyed, basically. But that's where, you know, the whole hare versus the turtle thing comes into play, basically. You are the hare and these mouse are the turtles, basically. or the tortoises, you are having to weave in and out all the time to save yourself, and that is where it is practically saving me. And see right here, I just get hit once by the mouse and it nearly takes me out. This is how weak the armor is compared to most other tanks, really. But it is still a fun tank. I will give it a decency on survivability, but I will give it a very, very fun rating for mobility, basically. You feel like you can easily take out 10 of them if you had, you know, the decency to handle them. Now we move on to the Crusader with Rose Hip. I'm covering this one because yes, it's the same tank, the driver makes all the difference, and Rose Hip is fast. Like, compared to Darjeeling, I can actually fly with this tank. I am moving in and out as quickly as I can, taking pot shots, guerrilla warfare tactics, hitting and running, gunning all the time. I'm basically hiding behind the tanks to keep myself protected at every way, shape and form, and I'm switching to each tank each time. They are too slow to keep up with me, which is really my only saving grace. The fun thing with this tank though is that I can drift, but it's just best not to, because if you drift with her, then there's a very high chance that your barrel will not turn. See right here, she hit the mouse hit my fuel tank and it nearly blew me up. And see with this drifting here, and it takes forever for my turret to basically turn around to hit the tank. So you're better off just keeping the aim on the target, staying close to them, getting right under their nozzles and their cannons to shoot them in the sides or their weak spots, basically. A very fun tank, but it definitely needs a little bit more correcting if you hope to do running and gunnings with your auto aim on and just drifting around. With this one, I would suggest not drifting as much. Just get close to them, get into their weak spots and just shoot them where they're hurting, basically. Drifting is really an unnecessary thing when you are this quick in this tank, basically. Either way, this is a fun little British tank which has stood the test of time. It's very fun to use. Its armor is very weak compared to other tanks. So, yeah, decent but fun. Decent but fun. We now move on to the American M4 Sherman. This is basically the bread and butter of the American army. Never mind the little flip over there, we right ourselves quite quickly. And we're back into the fray. Very fun little tank. It's very decent, it's very fast, very good with its firepower. Very easy to use. I feel like I can easily drift with this tank and then get in and out of combat. The reload is not as fast as I'd like it, but to be fair, I would rather have an average loading speed than, say, a 20-second loading speed. Or like a fast mobility tank with loading speeds as slow as, you know, like a turtle. There's no need for that. But that is no problem with the Sherman. I feel like I can decently drift. I'd like to drift a little bit more for the size of this tank. I feel like this tank could drift more with how decent its tracking is, how its tracks are on the actual bottom of the treads. But honestly, I don't mind. It's a decent, fun little tank. So for funness, I'll give it a decent rating. A decent fun tank, so in between those two. We now move on to the M4A1. A little bit different to the M4 Sherman. This one has a longer nozzle, a longer cannon. It feels like I can brake better with this tank for some reason, and the drifting is more elongated, so you've got longer drifting, so you can easily get behind the tank in front of you and hit them in their weak spots, basically. The reloads feels a little bit slower, just a tiny bit. Not much of a difference so that it's worse than the M4 Sherman, but it's still the same type, basically, just with a longer cannon. I feel like with this one, getting hit by an enemy is a little bit more forgiving compared to the other one, so its durability is definitely up there. It's definitely more durable than, say, the Crusader. So this is a decent tank. It's slightly better than the last one, so I will give this a fun rating. I feel like I can easily handle maybe 7 more mouse. If I got hit like 2 more times, I think I could take out 7 mouse with this tank. But yeah, so I'll give it a fun rating for this one. Now we move on to the Firefly. This is the powerhouse of the American artillery, basically, in this game. I feel like I'm driving a Porsche Tiger, but... No, I feel like I'm firing with the Porsche Tiger, but I feel like I'm driving with a Crusader to that degree. It's not as mobile as the Crusader, but its drifting speed is roughly the same as the M4A1. Sherman, but the firepower is easily just as powerful as, say, the Porsche Tiger. Basically, the mouse had no chance against me. I'd give that a fun rating. The P40 is a heavy tank, very fun to use. I felt very mobile with it, even though I get taken out later. See, I'm able to get in between these two tanks. Most other tanks I wouldn't even be able to make that gap basically, but with this one I can. I was just silly and got caught out here quite easily. So for a heavy tank, it doesn't feel like a heavy tank, it doesn't feel clunky, it's got good mobility, very decent firepower. I feel like it could have a little bit more firepower for being a heavy tank, but I'm not complaining. It's still decent. A very fun, decent tank, but yeah, I'll give it a fun rating. We now move on to the tankette. This is the fastest and most maneuverable tank in this game, so if you want mobility, this is the one to go for. Just don't expect to survive 1 or 2 hits from a mouse, basically. For me and my own protection, I'm having to go right up behind the mouse. I'm having trouble with it because this is actually my first time driving the tankette. The CV is fun for mobility, and when you take out these big beast of burdens like this with this little tank, you feel almighty basically. You feel like you can take on the world, really. A very fun little tank. The mobility for it is really what is saving it against the mouse, basically. Normally, a tank like this could easily be taken out with small mistakes like flipping your tank over. Then you would get targeted, but that never happened, basically. I was able to handle, getting myself flipped over again. Again, they're trying to hit me, and even the splash damage is doing minimal damage to me, basically. It is a very fun tank. I actually enjoy this tank compared to the P40. The P40 was fun, but this is definitely more fun. It's so nice to be able to drift in and out and get in and out of people's faces, taking out each tank as it goes, really. This tank is very, very fun. It feels like you can easily pick it up and get in and out of enemies real quickly and very, very fast. A very fun rating for the CV. We now move on to the M41 Semoventi. This is a very beautifully designed tank. I wish more tanks like this were used in the war, because I felt like these were very not vastly used because of the amount of times people would get damaged in these tanks, because only like a crew of 3 would be in this tank, really. It's very fun, decent drift, decent repair speeds, you've got decent mobility. The firepower is a little bit lacking. It feels a little bit better than the Hetzer, but not perfect. There's something about it that's just not quite right. The repair speeds are decent, but there's just something about it that's just making it like lose its charm. It's such a beautifully designed tank, but the mobility is just, it's up there, but it's not quite right. Like, I'm able to drift, but I really have to go into them and then drift a little bit too early to make it so I can actually get around the tanks to destroy them. It's like you have to plan ahead before you drift, and I don't think you should have to do that in this game. Like right here, I had to drift a little bit earlier to hit this mouse. Like, I'm actually waiting, so I'll give it a decent rating. The T-34 is the Sherman of the Russian army, basically. This tank is the jack of all trades of all tanks. This one is fun. It's got slower drifting speed, but the cannon is very powerful. You've got very good mobility. I feel like I can stop, start, but not as fast as, say, like a CV, but it's still decent. It's got decent mobility. The power of this tank really is in its drifting and shooting capabilities. So I'll give this a decent score. Very, very good tank. Now we move on to the more clunkier ones, the KV-2. The KV-2 is very powerful. Very, very powerful. I'm able to take out 2 mouse here just by sitting and shooting, waiting behind the mountain. This is really the best strategy you want. But when you're the only tank against a barrage of other tanks in front of you, you have to get into the fray at some point and start attacking them, because there's only so much you can do perched up on the side of a mountain. So as I go down, I basically drift very slowly, very sharpishly. I would suggest not drifting when you're on a high rise like this because you can easily get stuck. And I was able to take out these mouse with a little bit of ease due to the fact that I'm able to drift my KV2 slightly. The reload speed is definitely atrocious though, so very clunky, but it's not the worst one. Now the IS-2 is one of the most powerful tanks because of that cannon. I can drift in, blow them up from the back and just move on my way. The only problem is it's much slower compared to the other tanks basically, but it makes up for it with that cannon. I feel like the Porsche Tiger is slightly better than the IS-2 just by the fact that the Porsche Tiger is slightly better at drifting. This one's speed in drifting is atrocious. It is absolutely diabolical how slow this drifting is, so I'll give it a decent C on that one. Now we move on to the German tanks, the Tiger 1H type. Now we move on to this tank because although it's very slow, very clunky, I can still drift with it and it still feels very powerful. This feels slightly more powerful than the IS-2 because this was the staple of the German army. This is a very impressive tank. Very powerful from long range, very powerful from short range, and I can drift in quite easily. The reload speed is not where I'd like it to be, so that's where I'll knock a few points off, but I can't not give this tank a fun rating because it is just a staple of the German army. It is a beautiful piece of German engineering. It is a staple to the German army. Very beautiful. So a fun tank. The Tiger 2 is where I draw the line though. This is a very clunky bit of a mess. You cannot drift with it. It has more armor, but as you see later on in the video, I'm only able to take out 4 mouse. One manages to get me right at the end because I fucked up on positioning, unfortunately. Tigers are normally meant to be stationary tanks where you would angle them at a 90-degree angle so that when tanks hit you, they ricochet off. That's what Tigers were well known for, their high defensive capabilities. Whereas this, I'm just running and gunning in and out of the mouses to be able to take them out, basically. To basically quicken the attacks that I'm getting, but right here they are slowly whittling me down. This was my mistake, was getting into them this close to such destructive capabilities that is the mouse basically. So you see right here, I'm trying to get under the nozzle of this tank, but it's just not working for me, and that's where I unfortunately make the mistake of showing the rest of my tank to the underside of my tank to the mouse, and it's able to take me out no problem. So for this one, it is a decent tank, very well armoured. It's a little bit clunky, but not so clunky that I'll give it that clunky score. But it is not fun to use. I feel like I have to be able to drift, and if I cannot drift with a tank, then it is useless. So I'll give it a slightly decent score. Now the Elephant is the first one that I will say is absolutely useless. Like, I have to be straight on, and I can't angle it, so I'm a duck in the water. Clunky as fuck. We move on to the Mouse. Now the Mouse is, by all intents and purposes, the most powerful German tank in existence, if you ask me. It's a shame that they couldn't use it, because I think the war would have gone a slightly different way if this mouse was used. I mean, look at the destructive capabilities of this thing. I don't even have to move. I've already took out 4 of them. So for this, it is built for what it is. A fun, moving mountain. A very fun tank. Now we move on to the Yagdi Tiger. This one is not as fun because, again, I have to angle, and I cannot angle to defend myself. It is the same with the Elephants. And here I made the mistake of going in. I tried to get past them, to get behind them, to shoot them, and I cannot reverse because the speed and heaviness of this tank is making it impossible for me to get away. So for that, this is a very clunky mess of a tank, which you cannot angle yourself or even move your turret to be able to do any damage. You need other tanks to be able to defend you, and this is not a tank that is really worth putting your time into, unfortunately. There are some that might like this tank, but I am not one of them. I mean, I was lucky to be able to take out 1 tank, let alone 2 basically, but still. At least it's got more maneuverability than the Elephant, I'll give it that. It's not as bad as the Elephant, but it's up there. I can't even remember if I managed to take out 3. I think this is 3, actually. I managed to take out 3 of them. Not bad, not bad. I'm doing okay. But yeah, it's not as clunky as the Elephant, but it's definitely still Clunky. Now we move on to the Yagdi Panther. This one felt much more fun. I can drift. It felt like a smaller tank, but it felt quite armored. I was able to drift in and out. This wasn't as bad as driving as the Hetzer. I don't know why I don't like driving the Hetzer. It just feels like I cannot drift with it. But with this Yagdi Panther, this feels so fun. To be able to drift in and out, to be able to hit them, and then get away as quickly as possible next. A very powerful gun, a very well defendable little tank. It feels like a little tortoise, very well defended. It doesn't feel slow like an elephant either. It actually feels like it's got some power and speed behind it. Like, look at this drifting I'm able to do with this thing. A very decent fun tank. A very fun German tank indeed. Now we move on to the Panzer IV Tank Destroyer. This one is slightly like the Hetzer, but not like the Hetzer in one way, shape or form. I feel more mobile, but the drifting is definitely worse than the previous tank we just mentioned. And I feel like the Hetzer could be better on drifting. The reload speed is not as fast, but it's okay. It's an okay reload speed. The repair times are decent, but I just wish it had a faster repair speed so that I'm able to get going again, because I feel like with how slow the reloading is for some of these tanks, it should make up for it in other areas, and that just doesn't count when it comes to repairs. So this is a decent tank. It's not as fun as the previous two tanks that we've mentioned, but it's up there. It's decent. It's a decent tank. Now the Panzer III. Personally, my favourite tank. And no, not because my wife who drives it, because it is one of the fastest, most manoeuvrable, one of the quickest reloading speeded tanks you will come across. I think the only thing that can match this is the T-38s that we were talking about earlier with mobility. And although I'm quick, I'm able to get in and out, shoot them, run away, reload, very decent reload time, the repair speeds are fast. This tank was built for quick guerrilla warfare tactics. This is why Erica switched to this tank in Das Finale. This is a tank that can easily get in and out of danger real quickly. This is the type of tank you want if you are a run and gunner. This is basically for people who have ADHD and are cracked up on heroin, basically. This is a fast, fun little tank which is able to get you kills real quickly as long as you know how to maneuver it, when to shoot, when to repair, when to run, and when to get in and out of enemies' fire. Like even here, I'm able to stay close and still manage to hit them, get a drift in, fire it off, take him out, and then quickly turn around to take out the last enemy. This is a fun tank, and I will say that this is probably the best tank for maneuverability, even better than the Crusader, because with the Crusader you feel like you have no control, but with this one you have decency, and nothing screams better for control than decency and control. You have to be able to control your tank at all times, and when you feel comfortable you can do so many wonderful things, and the Panzer III for me is that tank. That is my tank. The Panzer III is my favourite tank. And secondly, before that, is the BT-42. This one may feel clunky at first, but once you get drifting, it actually feels more like a smaller tank. And that's because it kind of is, really, in a certain sense. The BT, although the reload speed is not as quick, it makes up for it in speeds once you get going. Yes, the acceleration speed is not as fast, but the drifting is decent, the repair speeds are decent. So overall, this is a decent average tank to the average tank goer. I feel like you need to put in time and effort for this tank to really make it shine. You have to know where the drifting curves are, you need to know when to drift downhill compared to uphill, because I tried drifting uphill here and it just doesn't work for me. So really map knowledge helps out if you know where to drift and where not to drift. You do need multiple shots to take out enemies like this, but honestly, with drifting capabilities like this, that's not really a worry, basically. The BT-42, although average at best, it is still a fun little tank, and I enjoy taking out enemies in this tank. So, it's a fun tank. Type 97. This is the cracked up heroin Japanese version of the Panzer III. This tank can fire quickly. It is very zippy. The drifting is not as capable as the Panzer III, which is a shame because I feel like this should be up there with the CV. Like, it should be up there with the Tank Air. I feel like its drifting needs to be a little bit better. Although compared to the Type 95, this one is definitely slower for a good reason, because this is a medium tank. The Type 95 is a light tank, so that would make more sense to be able to drift with it. And even the repair speeds are a little bit slow, which is kind of a shame really, because I feel like this tank could have so much potential if it just had a better reload speed. Sorry, not reload speed, better repair speed. The reload speed is actually the only thing that's saving it. The reload speed is so quick that I feel like I can fire 4 shots off within 5 seconds, basically, if you are accurate with hitting your button meshes, basically. The power is very fun. The actual transportation of this tank is decent. So yeah, very fun tank. Although decent in appearance, it is very fun to drive. I feel like your mobility is definitely up there with the Panzer III and CV. Now we move on to the Type 97 with the new turret. The power is more intrinsical, but the drifting is atrocious. I feel like you need speeds to be able to drift with this tank. I mean, it's a medium tank, but it should be drifting non-stop. I am able to drift with it, but it just feels different. There's something about this tank that just doesn't feel quite right. It's like the Sprog sibling that you didn't really appreciate when you were a kid, you know? But as it grew older, you grew to love it. You need time with this tank to make it work for you. That's how I felt with it compared to the other Type 97, basically. It's very powerful. The reload is slightly slower than the original Type 97, but it's still a fun tank. If you can weave in and out, if you know the controls of it very well, you can make it fun, basically. It's not clunky at all. The power of it is definitely far more superior than the previous one, so I guess that's where it balances out. I feel like the turret is much better, and you feel like you can get decent shots on them, so it's a decent tank. Now we move on to the light tank, the Type 95. Very fun, very small, as it's meant to be. It's meant to be mobile. You can really do 360s, you can spin, but you are really lacking in firepower. You have to get multiple shots off. The reload speed is fast for a reason, so you can get multiple shots off. That is where they've perfected this tank, is making it a fast, little, nippy reload speed demon of a creature. It's definitely up there. It's definitely faster than the Type 97, which it kind of needed to be, so it could keep itself alive. Is it on the same level with the CV and the Panzer III? No, but it is still competable. It can compete, it's very fast, it's very decent in reload speed, as it should be, or otherwise this would be a very useless tank to have literally no reload speed. The repair speed is fast. I wish it was a little bit better in certain situations. Like, I feel like it needs to be much faster with these smaller tanks because there's less to repair, but either way, I had fun with this. I felt very good with the mobility of this tank. Even when I missed, it didn't matter. I can just reset, and then redrift into the enemy's line of sight and take them out. Very nice, fun tank. And now we move on to the American Pershing, the M26 Pershing. Very powerful, very decent drifting, although for its size, for a heavy tank. I was actually surprised how very decent it was at drifting. Although, once you stopped, you really did stop. The acceleration of this thing is what kills it. If you stop, there is no way you're going to get going again within 2 to 3 seconds. You have to reverse to get out of certain situations, and that is very dangerous. That leaves you open to attacks. This is one of those tanks which are quite huge, so it's got a big surface area. It's not clunky. It's only clunky when you stop. Once you're moving, once you're in motion, you feel like a roadrunner. You can really get going. You can get firing off that cannon to destroy the tanks in front of you. But yeah, once it stops, it is pretty useless. Very clunky. The M24 Chaffee now is a light tank. It's not as fast as the Type 95, which is a shame because I feel like for a light tank, its mobility is where it shines. But there are situations where it's not really good. The only thing I can say about this thing is that the reload speed is decent. It's not as fast as it should be, but the suspension is fantastic. I feel like I can go over 5 rocks and I would still drive straight. Normally with most other tanks you would just go straight over, but with the Chaffee I feel like I've got good control. I'm not going fast, but I'm going at a decent rate where I feel like I've got good control, and really good control is far better than being like a speed demon. I know, I can't believe I'm saying that. But yeah, the Chaffee is up there. It's not as fun as the other smaller tanks, which is just a shame. It's just shy of being fun, but it's still decent. Now the T-28 is a clunky mess. I fucking hate this tank. I cannot stand how slow you are. Yes, it's a powerful tank. It's very powerful, but there's just something about having such unnecessary, overbearing power and that slow reload speed. I don't know how I won this game, because I was really expecting to get fucked up by these mouses, but for some reason the armor saved me in places where I didn't think that I needed it. That is its saving grace, is that the armor is thick, like thicker than a fake Brazilian butt implant basically, because that is the good thing for this tank, because without it I'd have been dead, because this reload speed is so atrocious that I'm thinking to myself, why on earth would you use this tank in close to close combat like this? You would be shooting from long range, which I should have been, but these mouse are very defendable in a certain sense, so I had to get in close, I had to get under the armor to be able to destroy these tanks. This is how close I was to defeat, because without my maneuverability to be able to get behind the mouse, to be able to take it out, I would have easily have been destroyed. And it takes forever to turn this tank. It's just so atrocious and clunky that I just cannot be bothered to use it again. So really, the only decency with this thing is that it was a very well defendable tank. Decent, but very clunky maneuverability. Now the Centurion. We lastly come to the Centurion. A very fun, fast, modern British tank. Very gorgeous. I would say it's less fun than the Churchill, because the Churchill is able to spin on its axis so it can move. That gave it a nice little charm to it. With this one, I cannot really drift on command. I have to move forward and then drift, which kind of takes the fun out of it, because all tanks have to do is just get in front of you to stop you from drifting. That wasn't a problem here with the mouse, but the cannon really makes up for it, and Alice as a commander really makes all the difference, really, because she really is the queen when it comes to tankette fighting, basically. She is one of the best commanders for that reason. She can go beast mode within a few 5 seconds. So this tank, very, very fun. It doesn't feel clunky. It feels fun when you can really just destroy on the open battlefield with that huge cannon of it, and its decent mobility. So overall, a very fun tank. Hello there, lads and ladies. I hope you enjoyed the ranking of the tanks. I very much did myself. Now I will be taking myself to Normandy to celebrate the 80-year anniversary for D-Day, and I will see you all on the 7th for Sweetest Monster. I hope you'll all enjoy that visual novel as I will. So, until then, take care, lads and ladies.